So, in this video, I will be doing a step-by-step of how I painted the legendary dragon from Time of Legends Joan of Arc by Mythic Games. The Joan of Arc game was an epic Kickstarter, and it had dozens of different miniatures and models. The coolest parts of these sets I found with these huge models of mythical creatures, such as this devil which I've painted previously. I also have this Hydra, which I'm currently painting on my Twitch account. The legendary dragon's probably the hugest one out of all of them, banana for scale. The wingspan is as large as my forearm. So let's get started. I've primed it in black and then given it a zenith highlight. I will be using a jade green from scale 75 fantasy range, and I'm just mixing it with a little bit of matte medium to help it flow better. I hope you enjoyed the royalty-free fantasy music. Painting this is a little bit different for me, as I normally do science fiction stuff, but the realms of fantasy gaming are what got me into miniature painting and gaming. I used to watch my older brother play video games, specifically Baldur's Gate, Planescape Torment, Icewind Dale. Games of that era were really cool because the standard editions used to come in big boxes. I'm just now using a Marduk yellow from the same range. Anyway, those games in the boxes used to have these really cool manuals in them, and the manuals used to make references to Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. So that's where I fell down the rabbit hole as I learned more about Dungeons and Dragons, and I subsequently played those games when I was a little bit older myself. I am now going to be using a turquoise from Vallejo, the game colour range, which is really nice and vibrant. As well as isometric games like Baldur's Gate, I also fell in love with games like The Elder Scrolls. The fondest memories of the particular games comes from playing Morrowind. I played it on the very first Xbox with the huge chunky Duke controller. A lot of the earlier video games you can see have been influenced by role-playing games and miniature games like D&D. The Fallout franchise originally started off as an idea for a role-playing game. The idea first became the game franchise Wasteland, which then obviously became Fallout, but now Wasteland has its own series of games, which are quite entertaining as they have that old-school isometric feel. I love how vibrant these colours are at the moment. They're really intense and rich. I'm going to start adding a few highlights here. I'm using Toxic Mist by Army Painter, which is one of my favourite colours. Some of my first miniatures were the types which you would find in those hobby railway sort of shops, where it was mainly train stuff, but they would have 1 or 2 sections for like Warhammer and other miniatures. I picked up that Getting Started set, the one with the Chaos Warriors in and a few paints, if anyone remembers that, from the late 90s, early 2000s. I've just mixed some white with that jade colour just to create some highlights. It was pretty rare 15-20 years ago to come across a Warhammer store in a small town, as you do now. You'd usually have to make do with a bunch of surly dudes in a model train shop. I'm just adding some Dawn Yellow to make some highlights. Nerd culture has definitely become more like pop culture again, with like D&D and Warhammer becoming more prominent again. I'm going to be using some oil washes now all over this model. In a previous video, I do show you how to paint with oils. I've thinned the oils with some mineral spirits, and now I'm just adding them to the recesses. The cool thing with oils is you can just wipe them off quite easily. I decided to go back in and create some even darker shadows with a little bit of a purple wash, which would contrast nicely with the green. You can't really see it too well on the camera. I think that Warhammer stores and model miniature stores are popping up quite frequently at the moment. There are a lot of stores now which are fairly close by to me or not too far on the train, which is kind of ironic now because I mainly just get stuff online. I would have loved going to multiple different stores when I was younger. I'm just adding a wash of a more deeper ochre type of yellow now to the scales. Now I'm adding a bit of a reddish sort of brown to create some deeper contrasting colours. I think oil washes definitely bring your models and miniatures much more to life. You don't have to spend a lot of money on oils if you just wanted to create some washes. You could just buy a cheap set. Please don't use your best Kolinsky brushes though if you're doing anything with oils. I'm just going to be using a deep blue now on the top parts. Scales on this miniature look really cool. They add a lot of texture and a bit more realism. I know it's a dragon, but you kind of get what I mean. Again, that's the cool thing with oil washes, you can just start to wipe them away. And the main body of the model now is starting to come together nicely. I'm starting to paint the wings now. I'm doing a similar method as I did with the main body of the dragon. Again, these have been primed with a black rattle can and then I sprayed a bit of white over the top. I really like the Scale 75 fantasy game range. They have a really nice intensity and coverage. It was a little bit of a chore, but also a nice change to paint something so huge. Now that I've done my highlights, I'm going to start going back in with the oil washes like I did with the main body of the dragon. I've used an ochre yellow and then a reddish sort of yellowy brown colour. Then I've just added a deep sort of green. There's a lot of lovely textures on these wings and with the rest of the model too, which makes it really cool for when you're adding washes and dry brushing as well. You bring out a lot of the details. And there the wings are finished. I'm going to be working on the base now, so I'm going to be making my own textured paste. I basically just add some water and some grate and a little bit of sand together, and it creates this really nice texture, and then I just wait for that to dry, and then I'm going to put some brown on by Scale 75. This stuff takes a couple hours to cure. It comes in handy when you're working with bigger models or like terrain projects. Now we are going to be dry brushing on some Deathclaw brown over the top. I've left the grate a bit chunkier so it creates some nice textures which we can dry brush over. I'm also just dry brushing on some grey on top of the castle, and I'm also using a sepia wash as well just to bring some detail out. I'm now adding some foliage, also just some cheap static grass, and also some bits and bobs which I have. Flavoured tea bags, if you cut them open, have some really interesting different dried sort of fruits and tea leaves and things like that which you can use for basing. And there we go, that's the dragon finished in all its glory. It was a bit of a pain in the backside to take some photographs of. Thank you for watching this video, and if you want to find out more of my work or if you want to support me, I am on other platforms here.